Well, good evening and welcome to our Wednesday program. It's good to have you with us again. And we're going through the book of Deuteronomy and we're in chapter 4. We're kind of coming to the close of what's called the historic prologue. And in this chapter, and the remaining of this chapter, we're going to see some very important aspects. Aspects of God, His character, but also we're going to see some warnings that the Lord gives in terms of the law and obeying the law. Now, have you ever gotten a warning? We get them every day. I mean, there's a warning on your dashboard that comes on, some little light that we usually ignore. Sometimes we get the warning in terms of someone pulling us over and saying, well, I'm not going to give you a ticket this time, but I'm going to give you a warning. In fact, one of our church members, a staff member's wife, I won't say who, but she was going up to Prattville just the other day, and she had never gotten a ticket in her life. And she was going up that little road out of Andalusia, just about to, just kind of south of Greenville there. And there's a little curve in the bend just before you get to I-10. And, well, it's a speed trap. That's all it is. It goes from 65 to 50 like that. And I've seen cops there a lot. Never been pulled over there. But this poor young lady was just cruising. And she's almost on the interstate. And, you know, you get close to the interstate, what do? You speed up. And so she got pulled over. She didn't get a warning. She wished she'd have got a warning. She didn't get a warning. Now, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it was a staff member's wife and a young lady, you know, and she's just, you know, learning about driving in small towns like that and learned an important lesson. But there wasn't a warning. It was just justice was all it was. But we will see some warnings here, and the Lord is kind of putting Israel on notice as they're about to go into the land. Now, these warnings, they're not designed to intimidate Israel. And when God gives us a warning, He's not coming in like some jackbooted thug just saying, do it my way or else I'm just going to wipe you out. So what He's doing in terms of giving Israel warnings in this 4th chapter, in terms of the law, He's helping them to understand that these warnings are designed to give them a strong relationship with Him and with each other. Also, these warnings are designed to enhance their quality of life in the land. That if they obey these warnings, if they pay heed to these warnings, that they'll have a good experience in the land. And then finally, these warnings are designed to give them protection from the sins of the pagan peoples. And they're going to see God deal with these pagan peoples who He has been very patient with. And He's going to deal very severely and harshly with them. And it's meant to serve as an illustration to the people of Israel that God is serious about what He expects from humanity. And so as we begin, we're going to kind of skip through this chapter. These warnings are kind of peppered throughout this 4th chapter here. And so the first one is watch yourself, or to take heed to yourself. We'll see that phrase, take heed, or take heed to yourself, 10 times in this chapter. Now, I'll talk about the 10th one in just a second. But so watch yourself. Verse 9, verses 15, and verse 23 is where we will see this warning. And so only take heed to yourself, verse 9. And then 15, take careful heed to yourselves. And then verse 23, take heed to yourselves. Now, you may be reading this text and you're like, well, wait a second. There's another one. And I counted this in the 10, but it probably shouldn't count because of an issue here. And we're going to do a little bit of an excursus. So an excursus is whenever you kind of run a rabbit, but that's the theological term for running a rabbit, excursus. And so verse 19 says, and take heed lest you lift up your eyes to heaven. And you'll notice in your Bible that there's something different about that phrase, because the words take heed are in italics. And so let me just run a rabbit here. So what does it mean whenever you're reading your Bible and you see words that are italicized? What does that mean? and sometimes we take for granted that everybody knows these things, and they don't all know these things. And so what this means is these words were not in the manuscripts, usually the oldest manuscripts, but typically these words weren't there, and the italicized words were actually inserted by translators to bring clarification to the wording and everything. So as we think about translations, no translation of any text is ever like word for word from one language to the next. It's just impossible. Because, we've got to kind of work around the different structures of the various languages. And so you cannot do a word-for-word translation from any language to another language. There's always some modification in terms of trying to understand, or there's maybe some extra words. For example, you may read a Greek word, and it may take 5 English words to say the same thing that they said with one Greek word. And it's just because the nature of language. And so italics were first used in the Bible in 1560 with the Geneva Bible. And so the Geneva Bible was, of course, out of Switzerland, and that it came from the Reformers, and they translated the Greek and Hebrew text into the German language, and they used italicized words to let people know that there would be some words that they will encounter that, well, those words aren't in the text, but they've been inserted by the translators to help us understand what it's saying in our language. This is not being unfaithful to the text. This is not adding to or taking away from God's Word. It's just what we have to do for things to be able to be readable in our language. And so by the 17th century, though, the 1600s, we come to a place where in England there are 3 different Bibles, and they're a mess. I mean, they are. And so there's a guy by the name of King James I who decides we need to clean this up, and we need to have a standardized Bible. And so he commissioned, well, in the 1600s, 54 translators to faithfully translate the Greek and Hebrew into English, and we now have what's called the King James Version, 1611. Actually, if you read the 1611, it's almost impossible. It's just old English, and so it's actually been contemporized a little bit. And of course, we have other translations off of that, like the New King James, which is what I use, and there have been other translations that went back and putting God's Word into a modern language. The New American Standard is one of those. The ESV is one of those as well. But so the King James Bible cleaned all this up. And so, you know what? Right now, I'm going to send my wife a text. She's trying to call me. Sorry about this. And I don't want to start over. So hopefully there's not an emergency, and we'll see here in just a moment. So anyways, so basically what happened was, the translator would go through, and there would be times when they would insert words. I'm going to give you some examples of that. And so one of the examples of that, if you've got your Bible, we're going to do a little bit of a comparison. So I've got a King James Bible here. And so I'm going to read it from. If you've got a King James, you may want to follow along with that. This is actually what's called the Dake Annotated Reference Bible. It's an old Bible. And okay, I got dinner plans now, so good deal. That works out really well. I knew you wanted to know that, but so sometimes when I'm recording, I've just got to take the call, or I've got to do a text, and just thankfully we have modern technology for all of that. So Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. I want to read verses 13 through 14. And this is just an example, and there's even some italicized words in here. And Moses said to God, behold, and here's the first italicized word, when. Well, the translator said, we got to put that in there because it just doesn't make sense in English without this modifying word. When I come, or otherwise it would read, and Moses said to God, behold, I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them. But, so the translator said, well, we need to put the word when. When I come to the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? And what shall I say to them? This is Moses asking the question. He said, in the Hebrew, it just was translated, I go to our people, or my people, and what do I say to them? So the translator said, well, let's put that little word when in there. When I go to the people. So that makes a little more sense in the English language. 14, and God said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say to the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. And so that's that text. We see one little italicized word. Now I want to compare that, though, over to John chapter 18. So in John 18, verses 5 through 8. And so we see where that word when helps us. In this case, in John 18, verses 5 through 8, we're going to see where they added a word and it doesn't help us, because it kind of takes away from the meaning of what Jesus was trying to say. And so I'll let you be the judge here. John 18, verses 5 through 8. Then Jesus answered him. They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am. Now, he says I am in the Greek. The translators put the word he in there. It's in italics. I am is what Jesus said, but the translators put I am he, believing that they're helping us understand that he's saying I am he. The question is, was he saying I am, as in when God said I am who I am? And I believe this is God saying I am. But the translators kind of modified that a little bit by putting the word he in there. Now, they didn't sneak it in. I mean, they tell us they did it because they put it in italics. And so, verse 5, I am, italicized, he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. And as soon as he had said this unto them, I am, and there's that italicized word, he, they went backwards and fell to the ground. Verse 7, then he asked them again, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Verse 8, Jesus said, I told you I am. But the translators put the word he in there, italicized. If therefore you seek me, let those go their way. So the question is, when we're dealing with italicized words, do they help or do they hurt? And most of the times they help us. I think in this case they hurt us, because I think they're adding something there that wasn't there. I believe Jesus is using the name for God, I am. The translators didn't see it that way, and so they added the word he in there. Let's just kind of skip over just one page to chapter 19 of John, 19 verses 15 and 16. And here we'll see a case where it does help. So, but they cried out, away with, and the translators inserted the word him. Otherwise, it would just have been away with. Away with what? Away with who? Away with him, italicized word. Away with him, again, italicized word. Crucify him. Without those two words, it would have read this way. But they cried out, away with, crucify him. It would have been very stilted language. We would have gotten the picture. We would have known what they're trying to say. But by them adding the word him, it helps us read it a little bit smoother. Pilate said unto them, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. Verse 16, thus they delivered him, therefore, unto them to be crucified. And they took Jesus and led, and there's that word again, him, italicized, away. If they didn't put that word in there, it would have said, and they took Jesus and led away. We would have figured that out. We're smart enough to understand that they're taking him away, but just for the language sake and the readability of it, they put the word him in there. So, what is the lesson of italicized words? The lesson is this. We got to be careful. We do. We need to understand that is not original language. And it's almost like the numbers that are in there, the chapter and the verse numbers. Those weren't original, and sometimes they got it right, and sometimes they messed it up. Same thing here. When you see an italicized word, just understand that that's not original. And try to read it and look at it and determine if what they're saying helps you read it better, or if it actually modifies the meaning. If it modifies the meaning, then that's a problem. So I just wanted to kind of run that rabbit, because I'm sure there are people who see italicized words and they're like, I don't know what that means. Why are they italicized? Are they just trying to emphasize something, say this is really cool or very important? What it means is those words were not in the original Greek. So back to the warnings. Take heed. I mentioned Deuteronomy 4:9. Only take heed to yourself. Be diligent to keep yourself, lest you forget the things of your eye that your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren. Verse 15 of chapter 4. Take careful heed to yourself, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke out of Horeb, out of the midst of the fire. And we'll talk more about this in just a moment. And then verse 23. Take heed to yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden you. So God is warning them here. He's like, being in a relationship with me means that you have to be introspective. You've got to know what your motivation is. You've got to always be on your game. Being in this relationship means an examination. We have to examine our hearts. We have to take heed. This is a careful examination. We don't get to just live carefree and I can just think what I want to think and do what I want to do. No. The Christian walk, a walk with God, is a walk of examination, of understanding our motives, our intentions, the thoughts that we have, why we did what we did, always examining that and being willing to say that was wrong, or realizing that we are in a right relationship with God. So there's no room for laziness in this relationship or with our theology. And that's a major problem today. I see a lot of laziness in our theology of what we believe, what we preach, what we teach. There's just, it's really bad at times. I hear preachers preaching stuff, I'm going, where'd you get that from? And they got it from the last guy they listened to, who was their mentor, who got it from the last guy. And they're just perpetuating their ignorance. And so we have to take heed to ourselves. God has an expectation that we examine ourselves. That's the warning. So the second warning is also found in verses 9 and 23, and that's don't forget. So we take heed to ourselves, but we don't forget. Verse 9, take heed yourselves, diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and they depart from your heart all the days of your life. 23, take heed to yourself, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make for yourselves you see the cause and effect. If you forget, here's what's going to happen. So, what do we not forget? Number one, God's works. These are his symbols of his love and grace for us, his works, what he's done for us, what we've seen him do. We don't need to forget those things. Those things are worthy of our remembrance, of us writing them down and reciting them and talking about them to coming generations. God didn't have to do all the things he did for Israel, but he did. And that was worth remembering. And God didn't have to do all the things he's done for you and for me, but he did. And those are worth remembering. And we remember these things, it keeps us out of sin. It keeps us in a right relationship with him. But also we remember his covenant that he's made in this case with Israel, but he's also made a covenant with us as well. We need to remember that we are covenant people. We're being in a relationship with God requires remembering that we're in a covenant. Now, I remember. I don't have to have this ring to remember that I'm in a covenant relationship with a woman, with my wife, Kristen. It's a symbol. There might come a day when I might forget because of age or whatever. I had a friend who had early onset of dementia in his 50s. And he forgot so many things. He forgot his medical school training. He was a physician. He forgot his family members. He forgot his wife. He couldn't remember. And he would wake up and see this woman and he was like, "Who are you? Why are you in my house? I don't know you." And it made him so uncomfortable. What he didn't forget was that he was a Christian and there were things that were right and wrong. And so over time, she said, "Well, listen, why don't we get married? And that will help you." Now, I mean, she's in her 50s. And she is watching her husband just fade away. And it's heartbreaking. But she didn't want him to be uncomfortable, so they had another wedding ceremony. And he thought he's marrying a new person. But for her, it was this sacrifice, and it was a heartbreaking one to do this again just so he would feel comfortable. God is saying, don't forget me. Don't forget what I've done for you. Don't forget the things I have provided for you. Don't forget our relationship and the covenant that I have made with you. And so we are committed to him and we remember that covenant. And then number 3, don't fail to teach the coming generations. Verse 9 and verse 10, verse 9 about take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, depart from them all your life. And teach them to your children and your grandchildren, especially concerning the day you stood before me, your God, in Sinai, Horeb, when the Lord said to me, gather the people to me and let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and they may teach their children. And so God is saying, don't fail to teach your children. Every person in a relationship with God has an obligation to teach the coming generation about what God has done. And when societies stop doing this, it is catastrophic. And God detests when nations who have known Him fall away from Him and they stop teaching their children about Him. And there are horrific consequences to that. And we are seeing that today in our society, in the European countries that have known God, and we have walked away from Him, and we no longer teach our children about Him. His word is no longer honored in our schools. His name is profaned and He's laughed at. And we would rather teach our children the carnal ways of the world than teach them about God. We are allowing the world to lead children away from Him and indoctrinate them in horrible, terrible, sinful things. And we're not honoring God with our education of the younger generation. And as a result, we're paying a price, and we're going to continue to pay a steep, steep price as a people as we move further away from God. Because God, He told Israel, don't fail to teach the young people. Tell them what happened. Pass on this knowledge. Pass on these experiences to them, so that their faith will be built up. And when since we've stopped doing that, I say we, there's people, Christians, who do that still, but as a whole in our society, we've stopped doing that. As a result, we've got such terrible, terrible sinfulness and wickedness in our nation. So, don't fail to teach the coming generation. And then, don't make false images, another warning. We see that in verses 15 through 18, and of course 23 as well. So listen to what verses 15 through 18 says in chapter 4. Take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. And so He's saying, look, you didn't see any form there. There was no image there that you saw. You heard a voice, you saw the fire, the storm that was on the mountain, but you didn't see anything. And here's why. Lest you act corruptly and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure. God's saying, don't do this. Don't try to capture me in the form of an image, of some carved idol. It's insulting, it's demeaning. You can never, ever capture my essence with a picture, with a carving, with a statue, with anything. Don't even attempt to do that, because all it will do is become a stumbling block, and you'll begin to worship the image rather than me. He goes on. So any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, or the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of any one that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water beneath the earth. They just came out of Egypt, well, they had dozens and dozens of gods right after these kinds of things. Creeping beasts and birds and, dogs and, other people and things like that. And take heed lest you lift up your eyes to heaven. You begin to look. You're out there in the wilderness and it's just stunning. You see the Milky Way, you see all these stars, you see the moon coming up. It says, take heed lest you lift up your eyes to heaven. And when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, and you feel driven to worship them and serve them. You have this experience where you commune with the universe and oh, look how grand it is. And it's magnificent. It must be God. Let's worship the stars. And look, they move, and we've got stars that shoot across the sky, and we've got some that that have patterns, and so they must be intelligent. And so let's begin to worship them. And the sun gives us heat, and it warms us up, and the moon gives us light by night, and it changes shape, and you get the picture. And so they begin to worship these things and try to predict their future by these things, and let the stars tell them things, important things. Take heed lest you lift your eyes to the heavens when you see the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the host of heaven, and you feel driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord your God has given to all the people under the whole heaven as a heritage. God is saying, I created these things. They're at my command, and I've given them to all people. But they're just big balls of gas and rock, and yeah, there's trillions of stars and all that, but I made all of it. I am the one that made it. They didn't make themselves. Verse 23, take heed yourselves lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and you make for yourself a carved image in the form of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden you. So, the takeaway here is don't worship anything that can't provide for you. Don't make something, don't look at something grand and stunning and say that's God, and begin to worship these things which you can have no relationship with. They are inanimate, or they are lower forms of creations than you are. Don't seek the creation and ignore the Creator. That's what Lucifer wanted us to do. And don't be so stupid as to worship something that isn't real. Now, you want to see stupidity? Go over to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 44. This is a picture of the height of stupidity. Isaiah 44, verse 9 and following. I'm going to read a long passage here because it tells a story. Verse 9, Isaiah 44, those who make an image, all of them are useless, and their precious things shall not profit. They are their own witnesses. They neither see nor know, that they may be ashamed. Who would form a god or mold an image that profits them nothing? Surely all his companions would be ashamed. And the workmen, they are mere men. Let them all be gathered together and let them stand up, yet they shall fear and they shall be ashamed together. Isaiah is saying, look, these people who make these things are ridiculously silly people. And yet they don't even know it. Verse 12, the blacksmith with the tongs works one of the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with the strength of his arms. Even so, he is hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The craftsman stretches out his rule, takes this ruler, and he marks it out with chalk. He fashioned it with a plane. He's talking about the wood now. So one guy's making a god out of metal. Here's a guy making it out of wood. He marks it out with a compass, and he makes it like the figure of a man according to the beauty of man, that it may remain in the house. And he cuts down cedars for himself. He takes the cypress and the oak. He secures it for himself among the trees of the forest. You see, he's doing all this stuff by himself. He's going in there, he finds a tree, that's perfect. He cuts it down. He plants a pine, and the rain nourishes it. Then it shall be for a man to burn, for he will take some of it and warm himself. He says, so he cuts the tree, some of it he splits into firewood, he warms himself up. Yes, he kindles it and he bakes his bread. Indeed, he then makes a god and worships it. He makes a carved image and falls down to it. He burns half of it in the fire With this half he eats his meat. He roasts a roast and is satisfied. And even he warms himself and says, "Oh, I am warm. I have seen the fire." And the rest of it he makes into a god. Do you see how stupid idolatry is? It's ridiculous that we make something and we worship it. And he falls down before it and worships it, prays to it, and says, "Deliver me, you are my God." They do not know or understand, for he has shut their eyes so they cannot see, and their hearts so they cannot understand. And no one considers in his heart, nor is there knowledge nor understanding to say, "I have burned half of it in the fire. Yes, I've also baked bread on its coals. I've roasted meat and eaten it. And shall I make the rest into an abomination? Shall I fall down to a block of wood?" He feeds on ashes. He deceives. A deceived heart has turned him aside. He cannot deliver his soul, nor say, "Is there not a lie in my right hand?" A lie being that idol he's made. He can pick it up and hold it and say, "This is a lie." And that's what idolatry does to people. It's a falsehood. It's insulting to God, and it's insulting to us that we would subjugate ourselves to something that is powerless. The fifth one is don't worship the heavens. And I just read that verse 19. Pagan peoples did this, when you feel driven to fall down and worship them. Even so, we see this today. People are following astrology and they think they can tell their future by the stars and the moon. And, all of a sudden Jupiter is in opposition to this. And, then you've got, the moon's in parallax and all this jargon that means absolutely nothing in terms of truth about who we are. And yet we believe the stars can tell us things. And they can't. And God's saying, look, turn to me for wisdom. Don't turn to what I made for wisdom. I think that's a very important lesson, because even in denominations that are Christian, they will tell you that you can go to other people who will intercede for you, who've already died, saints, and you can pray to them. And Jesus tells us to come boldly into the throne room. Why would we go to somebody else who can't provide for us and ask them to go intercede for us when we've got the greatest intercessor of all, Jesus, who's sitting at the right hand of the Father in the throne room? And so we make idols out of these things. And we've got to be very careful that we believe this kind of nonsense. So, number 6, the sixth one is the banishment and dispersion for worshiping false gods. This is verses 25 to 28. Banishment and dispersions for worshiping false gods. Now, I thought I was going to get through this today. I'm looking. We've already been 33 minutes and 18 seconds, and so I'm going to cut this in half and do the rest on a following Wednesday night. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 25 through 28. When you beget children and grandchildren and have grown old in the land and act corruptly. Now you would think that grandparents, people old enough to be wise, would not act corruptly, but they do. So when you act corruptly, and you make a carved image in the form of anything and do evil in the sight of the Lord your God to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that you will soon utterly perish from the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess, and will not prolong your days in it, but will be utterly destroyed. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you, and there you will serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. And so God is warning them, look, if you do these things, if you don't heed, if you follow false gods, you forget to teach your children, you forget what I've done for you and forget the covenant. When you've grown old and satisfied and you start dabbling in the sinfulness of the people around you, understand what's going to happen. I am going to come in and I'm going to scatter you. and a lot of you are going to die. There'll be a small remnant that will be preserved in exile, but that's what's going to happen if you do these things. And so there's this last warning in verses 25 to 28 about dispersion for worshiping false gods. And the reason why God is coming down so strongly on this is because they're about to go into a land where the false gods are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. And these people are going to be tempted to follow the pagans and say, well, if they worship these gods, and maybe these gods have power, maybe they can provide fertility, for our livestock, or for, me and my wife, or maybe they can bring the rain, or they can make our harvest even more plentiful, and maybe they can protect us against our enemies. I mean, if we've got one God, why not more gods? And he's saying, when you get in the land, and all of a sudden you become so cosmopolitan and so sophisticated and so open-minded and so welcoming of other philosophies and other ways of thinking about theology. He said, when you reach that point, I'm going to come in and I'm going to bring judgment upon you, and I'm going to scatter you, and it's going to be bad because you did not obey me, and you defiled yourselves, and you defiled my worship. And so with that, He is providing these warnings to the people of, look, I'm giving you the law, I'm giving you some responsibilities, I'm sending you in this land, but understand you've been warned. There's things I expect of you. And the same today. There are things God expects of us and wants us to do and wants us to live by, and that is His Word. Well, I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday night. If you're watching this on Wednesday, if not, whatever day you're watching it on, and look forward to seeing you on the Lord's Day right here at First Baptist Church. God bless you, and good night.
Jesus, come, let your grace fall like rain. Jesus, come, and flood our hearts again with your love. Holy risen one, Jesus, come. Jesus, come. For the prodigal that has gone away, for the traveler who's been led astray, for the one searching for the way, Jesus, come. For the blinded, deceived and confused, for the skeptics wanting to see the proof, for the ones needing to know the truth, Jesus, come. Jesus, come, and let your grace fall like rain, Jesus, come. Flood our hearts again with your love. Holy risen one, Jesus, come. Jesus, come. For the lonely hearts that struggle through the night, for the weary souls hanging on with all their might, for the ones longing for the life, Jesus, come. Jesus, come. Let your grace fall like rain, Jesus, come. And flood our hearts again with your love. Holy risen one, Jesus, come. Jesus, come. For the one searching for the way, needing to know the truth, for the ones longing for the life only found in you, Jesus, come. Jesus, come. Let your grace fall like rain. Jesus, come. And flood our hearts again with your love. Holy risen one, Jesus, come. Jesus, come.